So I'm Danielle Bremer. I'm the Chief Customer Officer here at Lean Techniques. And if you're joining for the first time, welcome. We're glad to have you here. Lean Bites is a short 16-minute talk where we work to provide you with simple, practical tips and techniques you can start applying with your organization today. Before we get started, there's always a couple housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout today's talk, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll either address them at the end or make sure to provide them answers in an email follow-up. Please do us a huge favor at the end of the session and complete a survey that will automatically pop up. Your feedback is important to us to ensure that we're hosting events and topics you care about. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce my partner, Chief Innovation Officer, Tim Gifford. Today, Tim is going to be talking about how to think about agents within your engineering organization. Tim, over to you.
Well, thanks, Danielle. Thank you all for joining me today. A few weeks ago, we had the honor of being at the TAI's Tech Summit, and we posed a survey to the attendees there. We were curious about how their efforts were going as it related to AI. And so we surveyed, I think we got 98 responses here, and was curious about whether they felt they were getting, the juice from their squeeze. Are they getting the impact that they want from the effort that they're putting into it? And at this point in time, a few weeks ago, about a quarter of them said, absolutely, clearly worth it. But about three-quarters of them are maybe still trying to find the value. And my kind of take on this is the same kind of feeling that I feel like we had when we were doing agile transformations for companies. They wanted to go from waterfall to agile, and they would try to apply agile everywhere. And it was there wasn't always the right tool for every job that they had. So when every problem is a nail and agents are the hammer, hopefully you didn't come to get like a formal definition of an agent and AI. I'm going to use kind of those two terms interchangeably. But if you are curious about my position on an agent, I feel it's basically an AI model that's paired with a skill and tools to accomplish some sort of task. We're not going to focus necessarily on every specific definition of that, but I just wanted to give you kind of my overall understanding of how I'm viewing those right now. But before you even start on agents, you really need to know what work you're trying to hand off to them. And so by the end of this presentation, I'll give you a framework to determine where your problems reside, for where it's bearing on this diagram, what tools, actions, and safeguards you should use to address that type of problem. So let's prepare for the journey. I will be your captain. The weather is mostly sunny. It's a high of 80 today. Currently it's 74 degrees. Make sure your phone is switched to airplane mode. Ensure your tray tables are up. I know it's close to the lunch hour. They're in the locked position. Focus your attention on the screen in front of you as we introduce the features of the Human Judgement Map, and then prepare to check your bearings of the work that you're doing against that map. Now, we need to make sure that we have some sort of understanding of what that map is. We need a safety briefing, if you will, of what this map is that I'm going to show you. And I want to talk first about judgment. There's going to be two axes on this graph. One, and I think is most difficult to understand, is one called judgment. And when I think of judgment, it's that evaluation of a given certain circumstance that makes a decision to form an opinion. And there's a couple things that I think go into judgment. One is your instinct, and instincts are the things that a species has without being trained. And so these are things that you know how to do without being explicitly told how to do them. And I think those are fraught with biases. And so we have to be careful with our instincts because those might pull out biases that we have. The next one is this intuition and gut feeling. You probably already always had this, like, I feel like this is the right thing to do, or my gut tells me. And what I think those things are really pattern recognition combined with your experience that we just have a hard time describing because we're not good at putting words to that. And I think what's important to know is I feel like agents can help improve your judgment. It can help you identify those biases that exist within your instincts, and it can also help you recognize those patterns and your experience and maybe communicate it in a way that doesn't say my gut feels. You're able to identify what those patterns are. You're able to couple it with your experience and turn it into a way that is a better way to communicate to your stakeholders. Now, on the flip side of judgment, I think we have to also think about negligence. So if we, in the absence of judgment, I think of this idea of doing the wrong thing or being negligent. And if you look at what a lawyer would say is that a reasonable person who doesn't apply judgment could be negligent. And I think that's interesting in a couple ways because I think right now people are worried about being negligent or using these tools too much and giving the decision power over to these tools. But I think at some point in the future, it might be just as common to be negligent for not using a tool that's available and coming up with a bad choice. So I feel like we're at this point in society where we're trying to figure out where is the appropriate time to use these tools and when is the appropriate time not to. So I want to give an overview of this map. And I've mentioned before, we've got the y-axis has judgment and the x-axis is risk. Risk, I'm not going to dig into, but effectively it's things that could potentially go wrong. You can also think of things that could go wrong that you could back out of. Jeff Bezos and Amazon talks about a two-way door decision versus a one-way door decision. Two-way, you can go in and come back out, so that would be lower risk. A one-way door would be something you could have to get right the first time. And for each of these quadrants, we're going to dig in over the next few minutes and talk about how to apply what action you should take depending on where you would put your workloads or the work that you're going to put in there. Come up with some examples, what the tools might be helpful in each of those quadrants and some safeguards. All right, so this top right one, I call the fighter pilot. This is where you have high risk and high judgment. This is where you need to make sure that you're using human decision making and avoid deferring that to the AIs. We could say this is the highway to the danger zone, if you will. But I do think if you're going to use any AI in here, you're going to need to use a customized model because of that high level of judgment. The other way to think of judgment, the way I think of it, is domain expertise. So if you're up in this high judgment area, you need to have explicit domain expertise that's different than what the models have been trained on from the public internet. So anything that's above the top two quadrants, you need to be thinking of that domain expertise that needs to be trained or provided to your model in some way. So if you're up in this fighter pilot area, look, you're going to need model customization, which is more complex. And I would say what you'd want to do with these problems that are there, you're going to want to break them down and make them smaller, and maybe they could flow into some of the other quadrants that are easier to manage. You know, things that you should do up here: product strategy, legal compliance, security policies. You don't want to have an AI on two sides that's maybe it's a lawyer agent, a legal agent. You don't want two legal agents fighting with each other. Probably they'd never come up to a final conclusion. Tools that you can use though to help with your reasoning is use them for research. And then I also mentioned is customizations. You're going to have to custom the models if you're using up here. But ultimately, we want the human to be a part of that loop. We want human reviews and audits associated with that. Next to that is a flight simulator. So high judgment, high domain expertise. I think of the flight simulator because if you need to know how to do it, but if you crash, it's not a big deal. We'll try it again. So in this quadrant, it's really about iteration, experimentation, trying as much stuff as you possibly want to do because there's a lower risk over here. This is where AI can help expand the options or the ideas that you have. Use it for creative thinking, brainstorming. I think of backlog prioritization. I think of work breakdown. So how are the different ways that you can break down the work? We've got teams that are having multiple agents on one developer's workstation. Is there a way to break the work down so that they can work independently of one another without having merge conflicts? So you might use the AI to help you break that work down so that you can have one person doing two changes without running into conflicts. Any process improvement ideas, or maybe even presentation slides. Tools, I like chat interfaces. This is where you could use vibe coding. or skills markdown files. So the vibe coding is really a place where you can prototype, try something out, see how it works, and iterate on it multiple times. Makes it easier. All right, down to the lower quadrant. This is where we've got lower judgment, but potentially some high risk. So I think of the captain walking around the plane before it leaves with a checklist. You don't necessarily need to be a domain expert, but you want to make sure you go through everything because there is risk if you miss something. So how do we break down a problem so that we can make it easier for a model that's been trained on the public internet to be able to provide information for us and uh, make sure it helps solve that problem? I do think this is the quadrant where most of the AI workloads are going to fit. Um, because it doesn't require a lot of model customization. And so the LLMs, the models that are coming out, have the training they need to do this because there's not a whole lot of domain expertise. But then we've got to make sure that we safeguard those. So we need to make sure that we're putting automated tests, CI/CD tests, tracing evals and guardrails. We want to see every request that goes in and see what responses that we get out. I also think, not everything needs to be AI generated. This could also be, if it's high risk and low judgment, you can probably use some normal traditional software workflows in order to achieve the results that you're looking for. Don't automatically apply the hammer of AI when it isn't necessary. And then finally, this autopilot. This is where we can automate it and walk away. These are simple problems, low risk, low judgment. You're most likely going to be able to use low code, no code tools. This is where you can make some templates, your checklist, summarization, boiler code. These probably a lot of these are going to live on your own system. But if they expand out, you need to make sure that you can automate them and make sure they're not going to break anything. Um, and then I think for safeguards, like, you can inspect it when it's broken, but if it's low risk, maybe you don't need to run it constantly or check against it constantly. And then, of course, there's also this idea we should be using common workflow tools, basic basic software engineering to get those types of things done. Well, let's prepare for landing. I know it's been a quick journey. To review, I talked about how judgment really requires this domain expertise. Your agents can help expand your options, limit your bias for anything that you have instinct or intuition for. And I put a summary up here of each of the different quadrants on the actions that you can take. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have finally reached our destination. We know that you have choices on how you spend your time, and we thank you for spending that time with Lean Techniques. On behalf of myself and the rest of the crew at Lean Techniques, thank you for joining us today. I have one other note. In 3 weeks from today, Scott and I are going to be sharing more specifics on how we are helping clients with becoming agentic first software organization. We have seen huge impacts to the way teams are working. If you are on a team and you feel like you hear about all these teams that are doing amazing things, but you don't feel like you're quite there, I think it would be a great presentation to come to. It is going to be an hour long, so you'll have to stick with us for more than the 16 minutes of this. But I do appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this Lean Bites. And as Tim mentioned, we have a special hour-long agentic organization webinar here on June 23rd. We will be sharing a registration link in the follow-up email for this. And please take a minute to complete the survey. It's probably 15 seconds. Actually, it'll pop up here in a moment. And we'd really appreciate your feedback on that. Have a great rest of your day, all.
Thank you all.